I was never the type to pay much attention to the stories that floated around the streets, the rumors about strange happenings, the urban legends that would make even the most cynical people shudder. But the stories of the clown started to spread quickly, and they didn't seem to stop. It was the kind of rumor that made you question everything you thought you knew about this city. It all began under the highway bridge, a gray forgotten spot, far from the lights of Denver. The bridge was home to a small community of people, those who had nowhere else to go. They were a tight-knit group, looking out for one another, sharing what little they had, but one day someone disappeared. He was just gone, no word, no note. We thought he might have moved on, found somewhere else, somewhere safer maybe. But then a second person vanished. Then a third. And people began to whisper about the clown. He was a strange figure, always appearing at dusk. No one knew where he came from. He wore tattered clothes, his face painted in streaks of bright colors, almost like a caricature of happiness. His silent figure would sit beneath the bridge, painting on a large canvas, propped against the concrete wall. He never spoke. No one had ever heard his voice. And then there was that smile, that fixed, empty smile that never wavered. Some people said they saw him under the bridge just before the disappearances. Others swore that they saw the missing, their eyes glazed over, sitting beside the clown, watching him paint. I thought it was just paranoia, the cold winter air getting to people's heads, until I saw it for myself. I was with Mike that night. We were heading back from the liquor store, our footsteps echoing against the empty streets. The snow was starting to fall again, heavier this time, blanketing everything in white. We passed under the bridge, and that's when I saw him, the clown. He was sitting there, his hands moving smoothly across the canvas, as if he was creating something from a twisted dream. Mike urged me to keep walking. He'd always been the one to get us out of situations that didn't feel right. He had a sense for these things, an instinct for when something was just off. But I couldn't look away from the clown. His eyes, dark and hollow, met mine, and for a moment I could feel my heart stop. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and hurried after Mike, trying to shake the cold that had settled into my bones. The next day, Mike was gone, just like the others. No one had seen him since we parted ways that night. I went back to the bridge, my breath clouding the frigid air, and that's when I saw it. The painting. It was a half-finished portrait, the face eerily familiar. It was Mike. I turned, my heart racing, and there he was. The clown. Standing silently behind me, his face twisted into that same painted smile. His eyes seemed to glisten, as if he knew something I didn't. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a piece of concrete, sending me to the ground. He took a step forward, the crunch of his shoes against the frozen dirt echoing in the silence. I scrambled to my feet and ran, the sound of my own ragged breathing drowning out everything else. I went to the authorities the next day. It took some convincing. The kind of story I had wasn't exactly something that sounded rational. But eventually, they agreed to investigate. They brought a few officers, flashlights cutting through the dark shadows under the bridge. I stayed in the background, watching, my fingers trembling with cold and fear. It was one of the officers who found it, a metal latch hidden under an old, rotting blanket. They pulled it open, and a foul, stale smell rushed out. Beneath the bridge, below the surface of the city, they found a trapdoor leading to an underground bunker. The officers hesitated, but the chief signaled for them to go down. I watched as they descended, the beams of their flashlights disappearing one by one. Minutes passed like hours. Then came the shouting, quick commands, muffled voices filled with panic. When they emerged, their faces were pale, their expressions hollow. They had found them, all the missing people, Mike, and everyone else who had vanished over the past weeks. Their bodies were there, laid out like some macabre art display, their faces painted with the same smile as the clown. I stood there, frozen. I felt the world around me crumble, the snow still falling, the bridge looming above. The officers sealed the trapdoor. the chief muttering something about getting the scene contained. I could barely hear him, my mind replaying the sight of those painted faces, each one a twisted reflection of the clown's grin. The clown was gone, disappeared into the night, as if he had never been there to begin with. But every night, I still hear the faint echo of laughter, somewhere far beneath the bridge. And I know that even though they closed the bunker, the clown, whatever he was, is still out there, somewhere, smiling, waiting for his next masterpiece. Story 2. I used to think my job at the funhouse was simple. Keep the mirrors clean, make sure the spinning tunnel didn't send someone to the ER, and keep an eye on any kid that looked lost. But then the night shift started changing, and so did I. It began with subtle things. I'd see a group of kids rush in, bright-eyed and hyped, only to notice later that one kid didn't seem to find their way out. At first, I brushed it off. It's a funhouse, right? I thought, they're probably hanging around inside for an extra scare. But it started to happen a lot more. One night, a girl in a red jacket entered the funhouse, her friends tagging behind her. I remember her vividly because she smiled at me when she gave me her ticket, a smile that's etched in my brain now, and not in a good way. By closing time, her friends had exited, laughing and talking, but she wasn't there. They hadn't even noticed. They'd assumed she got ahead of them or went to the food court. I assumed the same until I realized it was happening with more visitors. Something else was odd. The clowns. Funhouses have creepy clowns, but ours were the interactive kind. They would stay in character, never speaking, just following behind guests, jumping out when least expected. It's weird, though. There was this one clown I never saw leave. His makeup, with its harsh, painted grin and mismatched eyes, started haunting my dreams. He never clocked out, never ate, never even used the bathroom. Or if he did, I missed it every time. The other workers said he was probably just committed to the act, but it got under my skin. Last Saturday night, the snow was falling heavy. Not unusual for this time of year, but the kind that makes people want to stay inside. The funhouse was quieter than usual. Only a handful of guests filtering through, mostly teenagers and a few parents with their kids. The same thing happened, though. A small family entered, 2 parents and their son. They were the only ones left after hours. I did a sweep and nothing. The parents exited, but the boy, he'd vanished.
Police, maybe, but I didn't. Something in me said to investigate it myself. Maybe it was the thought that if I'd been quick before those other missing kids wouldn't be, well, missing. The funhouse was empty now, the air stale and thick with the smell of popcorn, grime, and something metallic that shouldn't have been there.
I made my way to the back, where the mirrors turn into a maze, and there's a door, an employee-only door, leading to maintenance corridors. I swear, as soon as I opened that door, it was like stepping into another world. The air was colder, the light dimmer. I heard distant voices, soft murmurs echoing. I started following them, heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst. The corridor twisted in ways that seemed wrong, leading to an area none of us ever had reason to go. And that's when I saw it. A group of clowns gathered around an open hatch. A smell hit me, sickly sweet, metallic. One of them looked up, his eyes catching the dim light in the hall. It was the one clown I had always felt off about. He was holding something dark and wrapped in a cloth, and my stomach turned as the realization set in. They didn't react right away. It was almost like they were waiting for me to do something, like they knew I couldn't scream, that I was too scared to move. The clown closest to me reached out, as if to welcome me, like I was part of this twisted ritual. I stepped back, but they all moved at once, shifting in that erratic, unsettling way clowns do. Exaggerated, cartoonish, but wrong. They blocked my way, corralling me towards the hatch. I could hear muffled cries coming from somewhere below. My heart raced, and I did the only thing I could. I grabbed the nearest object, a rusted wrench lying by the wall, and swung it at the clown closest to me. The impact made a sickening thud, and the clown fell back, but the others kept coming, their grins never wavering. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the concrete, slipping on the slick floor. I made it out somehow. I don't remember much of how. It's a blur of lights, mirrors, and that overwhelming stench. I called the police that night, but by the time they arrived, the funhouse was empty. The hatch, gone. No sign of the clowns. No sign of anything strange. They looked at me like I was crazy, but I know what I saw. And I quit the next day, but I can't stop thinking about those kids, the ones that never came out. I still see the clown's grin in my nightmares, hear those muffled cries. I don't know if they'll ever find out what really happened, but I do know one thing. Whatever they were doing, it's still out there. And they're still waiting for their next victim. Story 3. It was one of those long nights when time seemed to stretch out endlessly. A typical Tuesday in Denver, snow lightly dusting the streets, and Kevin had just finished a grueling shift at his night job. He worked as a janitor, cleaning the lobby of a high-rise building downtown, the kind of job that didn't ask much from you, but still managed to wring every last drop of energy from your bones. He couldn't wait to get home, crack open a beer, and drown the monotony with some late-night television. But as he turned onto I-25, he noticed something odd. There it was, a clown car. Bright yellow with red polka dots, exactly like the ones you'd see at a circus. It was lagging behind, a few cars back, but unmistakable. Kevin chuckled dryly. A clown car? At this hour? The image was ridiculous, but amusing. He glanced at his dashboard clock. 11:47 p.m. He figured it was probably some drunk pulling off a weird late-night prank. He changed lanes, passing a slow-moving SUV. Yet the clown car switched lanes too. Kevin frowned, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. Denver had its weirdness, but a clown car following him? He kept driving, and each time he switched lanes or made a turn, the clown car stayed the same number of cars back, its headlights glaring in his rearview mirror. His heart began to beat faster. The yellow car, garish and cartoonish, made his skin prickle with a sense of unreality. Kevin decided to shake them off, just to test his gut feeling. He pressed harder on the accelerator, taking random turns through increasingly unfamiliar neighborhoods. He cut across intersections and sped down narrow streets where only a few scattered streetlights worked. The clown car stayed with him, always maintaining a few cars' distance. Panic gripped Kevin's chest. His breaths came out shallow, fogging the windshield despite the heater being on. He could feel a tension, a bizarre, almost supernatural vibe, as if the clowns, or whoever was inside that ridiculous car, knew something about him, something personal. He turned into a deserted industrial area, hoping the darkness and the maze-like layout would confuse the car. He snaked through narrow, dimly lit roads that twisted between looming warehouses. His tires squealed as he rounded a sharp turn, narrowly avoiding a trash bin left in the middle of the road. When he checked his mirror, the clown car was gone. Kevin exhaled, relief slowly replacing the dread that had tightened his muscles. He turned his car towards home, shaking his head, almost laughing at himself for getting worked up. Of course, the car would eventually turn away. It was all just a strange coincidence. That was it. Probably just some freak trying to scare people. But when Kevin turned onto his street, his stomach dropped. Parked right in front of his house, in the glow of his porch light, was the clown car. It sat there, as if it had been waiting for him. He could see shadows moving inside, figures hunched, barely discernible through the tinted windows. A lump rose in his throat. Kevin's first instinct was to drive past his own home, to keep moving, but fear of what they might do to his apartment stopped him. This was his place, the only sanctuary he had, and whatever these freaks were up to, they weren't going to take that from him. He pulled into his driveway, heart hammering, and stepped out of his car. The clown car's engine revved and the driver's door opened. Out stepped a figure in a full clown costume, bright orange wig, oversized red shoes, and a painted grin that seemed to stretch far too wide. Kevin's blood ran cold. The passenger door opened next, and another clown emerged, then another from the back seat. Kevin counted 4 clowns in total, each wearing an identical expression. They walked toward him in eerie synchronization, their oversized shoes crunching against the snow. Kevin stood frozen, his breath coming out in plumes of white vapor. "What do you want?" he shouted, his voice cracking. One of the clowns pulled something from the inside of their coat, a single piece of paper. The clown approached Kevin, still smiling that grotesque painted grin, and handed him the paper without a word. Kevin took it, his hand trembling as he glanced at the page. It was an overdue notice, a bill from a loan company he vaguely recognized. At the bottom, there was a handwritten note. "We don't appreciate delays. Pay up, or we'll be back." Kevin's stomach lurched. It all clicked into place. The unpaid loan, the threats over the phone he had ignored, the letters he had tossed aside. These weren't just clowns. They were muscle, sent to intimidate him by whoever owned his debt. The ridiculousness of the situation did nothing to dilute the real fear gripping him now. One of the clowns leaned in closer, its painted smile inches from Kevin's face. The stench of cheap makeup and sweat filled his nose as the clown whispered, "Next time, we won't be so friendly." They turned and walked back to their car, climbing in with the same slow, deliberate movements. The engine roared to life, and within moments, they were gone, leaving Kevin standing there shaking with the paper still clutched in his hand. He went inside, bolting the door behind him, his mind racing. They knew where he lived. They could come back at any time. Kevin felt the weight of the debt, heavier now than ever before. It wasn't just money, it was his safety, his sanity. In the following weeks, Kevin paid what he could, but it was never enough. The notices kept coming, each more threatening than the last, and each time he saw a flash of yellow in his rearview mirror, his heart would skip a beat, his mind flashing back to those eerie, painted smiles. Eventually, Kevin lost everything. The debt swallowed him whole, and the clowns, or their employers, made sure he knew there was no escaping it. The threats turned into reality. His car repossessed, his wages garnished. His home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. Every creak of the floorboards at night making him wonder if the clowns had come back to finish what they started.
Kevin learned far too late. And sometimes collectors wore smeals painted on, but no less terrifying.